The devil tells us many lies to take us off our path, to take us off the course of righteousness, the journey to virtue, so on and so forth. But I believe one of the worst tricks that the devil or Satan plays on us is making us believe that we suffer for no reason. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can bear almost anyhow." And that is true. And that is why this trick the devil plays on us is so cruel. He makes us think that our suffering is for no apparent reason. It is just suffering in service to suffering, in service to more suffering. And this just simply isn't the case. We only suffer to become stronger. We only suffer for the best reasons. And when we forget that it's in service to something divine, something eternal, then we get off track and we no longer suffer. And also, one of the biggest lies that society still preaches is that comfort is good and pain is bad. I truly believe that comfort is bad and pain is good. For nothing great comes out of comfort, but nothing great comes without pain. But it's this notion that we cling to comfort over pain that makes our suffering harder to bear, that makes the right decision harder, that makes us shy away from discomfort and engage in comfort. And I truly don't know anything great that came out of comfort. I truly don't know. Enlighten me if there is something, but I can't think of one. But it's this, that was, I think, one of the big things that made me gravitate towards Stoicism at the beginning of, I guess, my intellectual pursuit. Because they preach that wholly and completely, that actually pleasure is the thing we need to beware. Because pleasure is so easy. It's so easy to, give into pleasure. But welcoming pain as a good, as a necessary for becoming all that you can become, that is what we need to be reminded of. And that is what Stoicism, to its core, reminds us of. That things are neither good nor bad. Thinking makes them so. Things outside of your control don't matter whatsoever. And that pain is not bad and pleasure is not good inherently. I think those are the three essential lessons of Stoicism. And they're very simple and they're very true. But they aren't practiced as they should be. So few people understand those core beliefs. And I think if we just held on to those three beliefs, we could go through life exponentially better. Everyone could go through life exponentially better, but it's not easy. And that's why we don't. And the devil also makes us believe these things are not true. He makes us believe that these earthly goods are essential for the good life. He makes us believe that things outside of our control are essential for the good life, that they aren't even completely and wholly outside of our control. And if we can just position ourselves in the right position, then we will have a control over them. The devil is very mischievous, and suffering is a core element of life. That is like, I think that's like the first teaching of Buddhism is like life is suffering. And it's like, yeah. But it's the second thought that matters. It's the thinking that we bring to that thought that life is suffering. That is bad. That is not bad. as long as you have a strong enough why, your suffering is in service to something great, something divine. And you cannot become all that you are without suffering, without hardship. Who would Hercules have been without his labors? He would have just been some other guy who maybe claimed he could have, taken down an enemy in lion with his bare hands, who could have defeated a hydra, who, could have done all these things. But everyone would have thought he was crazy. No one would have believed him, and it would have all been hubris because he had no proof. But Hercules became Hercules through suffering. And that is like another core element of Stoicism, the idea that the Herculean choice. I think this was proposed by Zeno at the painted porch, like where he taught first came up with Stoicism or the doctrine essentially. And it was the Herculean choice. Hercules, as the story goes, came to a crossroads early in his life. And one crossroads, and a girl came down and said, take this road and your life will be easy. It will be pleasurable. People will know you. You will have fame, so on and so forth. And then he looked to the other road and there was, another girl, and she said, your life will be hard if you take this path. It will be uncomfortable. You will have to sacrifice so much for virtue, and so on and so forth. And Hercules chose the hard path. He made the Herculean choice to say no to comfort and say yes to discomfort, to say yes to suffering and service to growth, and service to becoming who he was. And there is no greater why than that. Becoming who we truly are. There's nothing better than that. There's nothing greater than that. And all suffering and service to that is a strong enough why to bear. And the Stoics and the Bible say the same thing on suffering. We sometimes, as Seneca says, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But also, that is the only thing that makes our suffering unbearable. Because, the Bible says that God will never tempt you beyond that which you can endure. And, Stoicism says you either can endure it or you can't. And if you can't, that just means death. So while you're still alive, you can endure it. So endure it. And you will never be tempted beyond that which you cannot endure, because you wouldn't be enduring it if that were the case. And I think that's also something we need to keep at the frontal lobe of our brain, keep in the frontal lobe of our brain, because we are never tempted beyond that which we cannot endure. It is always this, suffering more in imagination that we bring to the table. As people say, I can no longer bear this, they are actively bearing that which they say they cannot bear. We can endure if we do not let the devil pull the veil over our eyes and make us think that our suffering is in service to nothing, that it's a waste of time, that we will never see the fruits for our labors. We cannot be tricked into this. The devil, I like to say, lives in what ifs. And because, I mean, as humans, I think it's apparent we have a negativity bias. So we start, doom looping down. When we go into a what if mindset, we have a negativity bias. So it's typically not sunshine and rainbows. It's not like, oh, what if it all works out? Oh, what if, my wildest dreams come true? It's like, what if it all crashes and burns? What if I die? What if, fill in the blank with your catastrophe? I mean, and I think the devil lives in there because he wants us to believe that it's all not going to work out. It's all in service to nothing. Our virtue, our hardship, our sacrifice is all for naught. And we can't allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen, because when that happens, we will fall. We truly fly when we realize that it's all in service to becoming who we are. But we truly fall when we stop forgetting. When we start forgetting that this is in service to something greater than ourselves. The main point of this video is just not to advise you, to advise myself, to not let the devil convince you that your suffering's for nothing. And at the same time, to realize that suffering is amazing, that we could not become the best versions of ourselves without it. That a life without resistance, without suffering, without hardship, without difficulty, simply would not be worth living. That is what gives life meaning. The uncertainty, the difficulty, the hardship. These are the things that grow us. We pray for strength, and then God gives us difficulties, and we say, woe is me. That is the saddest condition of the human. And I feel bad that God has to endure that over and over again. Imagine answering prayers and then being cursed for answering the prayers of these people. But that's what we do when we ask for strength. That's what we do when we say that we want when we say that when we ask God to give us what we need, not what we want. When we say those prayers, when we ask for these things, they are so deep, they're so powerful. Such a huge thing to ask. Imagine saying, no longer give me what I want, just what I need. You have to be ready to not receive what you want for a long time until you realize that what you truly want is what you need. And then when you can get to that position, you only want what you need, and you only want what happens to happen. And from that position, there's no greater harmony. There's no greater peace than in our capacity to want what happens to happen. Especially if our prayers are orderly, if our prayers are aimed high and in the right direction, there's nothing better than wanting what happens to happen. For we've already prayed that we want to get what we need, not what we want. We've already prayed for strength. We've already prayed for all these virtuous things, all these uncomfortable, all these pain-inducing experiences. The last thing to do is understand that our prayers are being answered. The last thing to do is realize that our suffering is in service to so much. The last thing to realize is that it's not even good to have dreams and goals for the future. Obviously it is, but realize that God has so much more in store for you than you even can ever think of. And if you ask for what you want, you're limiting your future to your own imagination. But God has so much more in store for you. Just pray for what happens to happen. Want what happens to happen. Realize that you're getting what you need, not what you want. Remember, your suffering is never in service to nothing. Your suffering is always in service to strength, to becoming the best version of yourself, to love, to peace, to true happiness, to tranquility, to eudaimonium, all these things. And even the fall, isn't, if it's in service to flight, is it really a fall? I've been reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, and this is an amazing book. And Nietzsche talks about, like, Zarathustra talks about, which is Nietzsche, I mean, but Zarathustra talks about how he doesn't care. He doesn't care what we believe. He doesn't care what you believe when you go into the fire. He cares what emerges from the fire. It doesn't matter the beliefs we hold as we are falling, as we are becoming worse, as we are being burnt up. It matters what we believe when we are born again. It matters what we know now that we've been through the fire. It's one thing to know. It's a completely different thing to understand that which we only used to once know. And truly to be born again, to go through the fire like a phoenix, you know, the mythical bird, like if the phoenix, burns up and is born again. You don't cling to that old version of yourself that has been put through the fire. Cling to what emerged from the fire. And don't act like you could have been what you are without falling, without burning, without going through hardship, without suffering, without pain, without discomfort. You would not become that which you are without any of these things. You could not be born again if you did not first die. We all want to be born again, but we don't want to die. We all want to go to heaven, but we don't want to die. It's this notion that death is bad is what keeps us from becoming our true selves. Death is not an evil. It's our idea of death. Because we do not like change. The human just does not like change, but that's truly mostly the ego that doesn't like change. It's more the ego than the man that doesn't like change. Because for some reason, the ego doesn't want us to become who we are. That's why we feel resistance, as Stephen Pressfield talks about. That's why when we're on the right path, it can feel so wrong sometimes. It feels so right, but at the same time, it feels so wrong. And that's how you know you're on the right path. That's how you know. But it's not easy. Understanding these things and knowing these things to be true doesn't make the suffering any easier. It just makes it bearable when you understand your why. And when you understand that your suffering is not for nothing, then you welcome suffering because you understand you can't get that without it. Don't allow the devil to deceive you. Don't allow him to trick you that living up to your ideals and principles is a waste of time, that your suffering is in service to nothing, that nobody's listening to you, so you should just shut up. But is the dew not strongest at the stillest part of night? The most silent part of night, of morning? Is that not when the dew is most fresh, most engulfed, most divine? Speak your truth. Walk your path. Trust thyself.